Okay, today's topic. As we started designing the convention in the seminar series for the 70th, you just can't cover everything. And we tried to get a couple of tactical, a couple of operational, and a couple of strategic vignettes. And a strategic vignette, I believe, is Det-A, the story of special forces in Berlin, which really spanned from Detachment A till its deactivation, and then Physical Security Support Element Berlin, or PSSE B. It's a long time frame, over 30 years, and you just can't give it justice in an hour. So, about a year ago, started working with Bob Charest, Master Sergeant retired, right here on the screen, and we took a look at how to actually call this down and what are the important components. We really wanted to look at the strategic, unconventional warfare mission that Det-A had from its inception in the 50s till about sometime in the middle 70s, just before the counterterrorism mission came on. And really that was kind of the lifespan of a lot of the Lodge Bill or Lodge Act displaced persons that were a part of that. These were your East European, Hungarians, Czechs, those types. And they were really the native speakers, and they were a component of that. So we wanted to focus on that part. Now, it's hard to do so. I've been speaking with several individuals, and as folks are in that organization, they see it for their sliver of time in a compartmented element, and it's hard to get the full picture. Bob Charest, kind of the man that brought Det-A in from the cold, started a Det-A website, which is one of the best websites I've seen for capturing a unit's history. It's tremendous. He'll introduce us to it for a second. And that's one you want to go take a peek at. And we've tried to capture it along the line. We've gone through several speakers trying to get a speaker in here. We had Nick Brockhausen as our finalist. I mean, we've gone through probably 4 up until we got Nick, and then we had Nick on tap, and unfortunately he had to cancel about 3 weeks ago, so we circled back around and we got Bob on Zoom. Just couldn't make it here. So at this point here, Bob's got 2 fairly long tours in Det-A, broken up by some Vietnam tours and other tours at Devon's. And Bob, your big bio is on the big board out there. I'm not going to cover that here in front, but I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to go back to my computer, sit down, kind of control this thing the best I can. Bear with me. Platform's yours, Bob.
Talk of a new Cold War as tensions escalate between the Americans and Russians.
Chess game is to contain Russia.
Должны понимать, что с нами лучше не связываться.
There's no check on what Putin may do.
Today, the free world and the communist world are locked in a peculiar struggle for the minds of men.
The immediate threat to free men is in West Berlin.
This is another type of warfare, new in its intensity, war by guerrillas, subversives, insurgents, assassins.
Land in Berlin, and 2 guys throw a wrap around me and says, "What the hell are you doing in that uniform?" And I said, "I'm an officer of the United States Army." And they said, "Not today, you're not."
Russians realized absolutely that they had something living there that could create a guerrilla warfare.
There were bridges that needed to be blown, communications needed to be interrupted, basically raising havoc in the city.
They didn't even know I was an American. I dressed, I looked German. We played basketball at the Berlin Brigade.
The West Germans did not know we were there. They were hidden in plain sight. no significant movement by the other party will go unnoticed.
On arrival in Det-A, they gave you different documentation using pseudonyms.
One of the targets I had was Carlos the Jackal. Walked inside of the French library, dropped an attaché case, went outside, had a cigarette, watched it blow up.
I was born in Lithuania, and the last rank I had was Major General.
We were tasked to do lots of things that nobody even knew about.
Thanks, Bob. And as you're getting reset to tell the story, if I could have a show of hands in here, anyone in here that was in Det-A? We have two. Henry, you were in Det-A. So Bob, we got three that were in Det-A. How many folks do we have in here that were in PSSE-B? 1, 2. So Bob, we got a pretty good crowd, and the room is full. You cannot see them, but the room is full right now. We're going to turn it over to you for Det-A. We'll cover that. We'll do the questions and answers, and any remaining time, we'll have one of our PSSE-B persons, I think Mitch, will get up, and if we have time, we'll cover a little bit on that history if we do. Thank you. Over to you, Bob.
Okay, folks, I'd like to see a show of hands. Show Chris. How many of you folks sitting in that room have ever heard of Detachment A during your career in Special Forces?
Almost a resounding yes.
Oh, really? Well, I'm very surprised because during my time and when I left Det-A in 1978, came back to the States, of course, everybody was down at Fort Devens, and there was not a lot of people that heard of Detachment A Berlin. If they did, it was very remotely, not too much was covered about Detachment A. And we're going back a little time in history. You take a look at today, what's going on in Ukraine, and you swing back in history to 1948, when the Russians were trying to shut down Berlin. They closed all land access to and from Berlin. They were doing the same thing. They were trying to take over Berlin and all of Europe. Well, that made the Supreme Allied Commander in Germany and the Berlin Brigade Commander and NATO very, very leery of what was going on. So in 1952, 6 teams from Bad Tölz, Germany were deployed to Berlin. Now, at first, they were not at full strength, and they were assigned to Berlin Brigade at McNair Barracks, 6th Infantry. They stayed there getting their target orders, target cases from the CIA, organizing for their UW Unconventional Warfare mission. Now, can you imagine, when you hear of unconventional warfare, you think it's rurally out in the woods and stuff like this in the old days. Well, try doing it within a city like Berlin. It was not easy. Detachment A folks did this, they changed it, they modified it, and it's being used today in several areas because of what we found out during our communications in Berlin was extremely hard. You had your primary meetings, dead drops, you had your live drops. And if you were a commo man, you had the 109 radio. And if we were exercising within the city like we did all the time, and you wanted to communicate back to base station, the 109 was Morse code, of course. You had a transmitter, you had a receiver, and you had a hand crank generator, which you did not use within the city, okay? Because you were mostly in guest houses and stuff like this, safe houses. And so you had to use we had modified controlled access that we could plug into the wall, power packs. But the thing with that was when you were sitting in a guest house and you're trying to communicate back to back base station and you got this power pack plugged into the wall, as soon as you hit that key, guess what happened? All the lights in the guest house started dimming. Okay, so that was not too feasible, but it was the only way we had. Then you had to hide the antennas. We had clandestine antennas. You could load bed springs. You tried all kinds of things that would work. because you could not put your antennas out the window like you'd want to. And that was too obvious. So that was one aspect. Everything was encoded and decoded with Diana pads to communicate back and forth. And these were put in dead drops. And the dead drops were marked by load signals and unload signals. One of the favorites of mine was I'd go to a telephone booth and I'd look up the directory and I'd find, say, oh, my name's Schmidt. I put a check mark right next to it. Where that was my load signal. Now the guy that was going to receive this drop would come in, look up Schmidt, you see that little check mark on the side. Okay, there's a message. So the message was placed somewhere obvious, not too obvious. I mean, in a rock pile, magnetic thing under a bridge railing and stuff like this. So that was a part of the communications problem that we had, and we've modified and successfully controlled it and used it within the city. All these people that came up from Bad Tools, like Chris said, were from the lot. Most of them, 50%, I'd say, were Lodjak folks from East Germany. And that was a great help because a lot of them were born and raised right there in Berlin. Now, under the Lodjak, they could volunteer to join the military. If they served honorably for 5 years, honorably, they could get out and have be an American citizen automatically. Well, most of these guys stayed, and they stayed in for 25 to 30 years. Like in Berlin, we had Peter Stalos, Hilmar Kulik, Wolfgang Ostertag, Gerhard. And these guys stayed in, and most of them stayed in Berlin. Thankfully, they did because, when you first got there, when I did in 1969, first thing you did was you got a bunch of Deutschmarks. You went down to the Fürstendamm, KDV, and you bought all German clothes. That was a dress code, coat and tie, period. We had Walther MPK machine guns. They would fit the briefcase, fold up 9mm. That was a weapon of choice for Detachment A at that time. And once you got your clothing and things like this, immediately you was hooked up with one of the old timers. And you went downtown and learned how to use transportation within the city. You had the S-Bahn, which was East German, which you could not use. You had a U-Bahn and the bus transit system. You got that down to a fine art. That was the way you transported yourself within the city itself all the time. Okay, and the unique thing about this is some of the things you learned was like you were almost under surveillance. You were surveilling people, they were surveilling you. You knew this. So some of the tricks that we modified, recognized, were you stand in front of that U-Bahn door, really right in front of that door. And it was open for so many seconds, and you knew exactly how many. So if somebody was tailing you, you'd step into that car, and that door would close immediately. And that guy that was following you was just looking at you, you just go, see you later. Down the track you went. So that was part of the stuff within the city. And targets we had were mainly all kinds of power facilities, the rail line that surrounded Berlin. Demolition was very, very well taught in Berlin. We have modified A teams, okay? You had 3 demo men. You eliminated the XO. We didn't need an XO, so we just filled in another demo man because demo was the key means of destroying our targets during that phase of the unconventional warfare. Some of the tools of the trade we used there were vials full of shaved steel. These would be dumped into turbines in the power stations. Another one was lumps of coal filled with C3 and later C4, because that was the primary energy source at that time in Europe and especially Germany. So these lumps of coal would be put in a railroad car. They put it in, shovel it in the engine, and well, what happened next is, it's history. And so that was part of the tools of the trade that we used. And we were always being watched. And we were under the direct command of about three places: Berlin Command, CIA, SOFTI, Special Operations Task Force, Europe, and We had no real command exchange between Berlin Brigade. Every once in a while, they'd run a exercise in the Wannsee or something like this, and we'd act as aggressors. And same thing with Bad Tolz with the 10th Special Forces. We were not under their command. We'd go down there for a jump every month. We'd shoot up and would fly down on a C-130 out of Tempelhof Air Base, head down to Bad Tolz, Germany, and land at Munich. 10th Group would meet us up there with the parachutes. We'd shoot up, head down, get back on a plane and jump into Karen DZ down to Bad Tolz, Germany. They 10th Group would provide Mako and stuff like this for us. That was our main communications with Bad Tolz, except for Flintlock. When Flintlock came on, that was a big NATO maneuver once a year. We normally would team up with Tolz in some way, shape, or form, either as guerrilla chiefs, assets, or an actual team mission ourselves, where we would go into isolation, get briefed on what our targets were and things like this, and jump in and do our Flintlock exercise. And the tools of, like I said, the tools of trade, I went over this with you, in the team room was in Berlin. Now that we had 6 teams. Berlin, in Det-A, it changed in 1958. They left McNair Barracks and moved to Andrews Barracks, where they stayed until 1984 is when Det-A finally closed its doors. I'll go into that in detail a little further on. Now you had 6 teams. They slowly filled up. And the primary reason why it was slow filling those up was lack of officers. We were not a branch. We couldn't find officers, airborne qualified, German language qualified, fast enough. And so it slowly grew and grew and grew. Now you had 6 teams. You had Det-A, it was a 3-story building. You had the basement downstairs with S4 and the head medic section. Upstairs was the S1, S2, S3, and S1. And on the 3rd floor was teams, the team rooms. Now these team rooms look like jails. They had 2 doors. The outer door was a gated door, and then they had the inner door, the knob. Teams stayed in these rooms. Your daily, I'll go through the daily routine in Detachment A. First thing you did, you got there at 7 o'clock in the morning, you got a formation. The Sergeant Major would get you up there, give you all the stuff, what's going on and stuff like this, admin wise and things like this. And then you got in your PT clothes. PT was very, very rigorous. And then Detachment A, they really worked on that. That was about the only time you saw all 6 teams at once. Because once they did PT, they came back, they went into their team rooms. Now their missions, we didn't know. Each team was compartmentized. You didn't know what team 2 did. You didn't know what team 3 did. You didn't know what team 4 did. Sometimes you'd come in for formation, team 1 be gone. We didn't know where they went, but they were gone maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And it was on some kind of a special mission that they were doing. In addition to unconventional warfare, Detachment A teams conducted all kinds of training, some that you would never believe what we did. We trained exclusively with the Germans, the BGS-9 anti-terrorist unit, the Germans up in the Eckenförde with the waterborne operations. We were very heavy into scuba. All our scuba gear was German, Draeger type brand. We had a 1-man portable decompression chamber that we could take with us whenever we went outside for scuba, and dual stage tanks. And we had a scuba section. Team 1 was scuba, which I was one of the instructors. Well, there was 3 instructors there when I first got there in 1969. I was one of them, having had my experience with 10 Special Forces and Bad Tolz earlier. And so that was the essentials on team training and things like this. The Berlin access was another thing. Now, no other aircraft could fly into Berlin except Pan Am, BEA, and the French planes. No other civilian aircraft except Pan Am could fly into Berlin. That was controlled by the Soviets and the East Germans. And we could only use Tempelhof Air Base. That was the international air base at the time, until early 70s when they built Tegel Air Force Base. We'll go into that a little later also. And have I lost anybody so far, or are you still with me? Okay. Now, we'll fast forward a little bit here. The 60s, dress in the late 60s were all kind of the same. Nothing changed until coming to the 70s, things started happening in Europe very, very fast. The PLO were trying to blow every aircraft they could find up. So we were assigned to prevent this from happening to Pan Am. Some of our teams were directly assigned to Tegel when Tegel opened to protect Pan Am. We had Pan Am uniforms, Pan Am maintenance uniforms. We knew how to enter that aircraft from every angle you could think of. We had a 707 abandoned at Tempelhof Air Base, which we used to gain access to somebody that hijacked, if they hijacked Pan Am. Now, also during the 70s, you had Baader-Meinhof gang were running around Europe, blowing up GIs, clubs, cars. You had the Red Brigade running around doing their stuff. Of course, the PLO. And in 72, you had the blowing up, the thing that happened at the Munich Olympics. So the PLO kidnapped the Israeli wrestling team. And there was a big standoff, and the Germans weren't prepared for this kind of warfare at all. So things started, like I said, things started changing very, very rapidly. And that's when, after Munich, like I said, the Baader-Meinhof and the Red Brigade were running around, and they kidnapped, the Baader-Meinhof gang kidnapped the mayor of Berlin. Now, when they did this, that was nothing the Germans weren't prepared for, so they didn't know what to do. So Det-A was slowly forming and being prepared in addition to their unconventional warfare mission. About 1974, we got assigned a CT mission, Communist Terrorist mission called 0300. At the same time, the Germans were building BGS-9. Now that was pretty controversial because that was an anti-terrorist unit. The BGS were the Bundesgrenzschutz. They guarded the border. They were not prepared for internal insurrections, which was happening all around Europe at that time. And it happened very, very fast. So when we got assigned 0300, Detachment A immediately went into Communist Terrorist, and we still had the unconventional warfare mission. In addition, that remained, but then the focus was now on communist terrorists. We went into SWAT team training very fast, sniper training. We had teams with the Delta Force of Europe. At the same time, Detachment, not Detachment, but Delta Force was being formed. All three units were being formed roughly around the same time frame because of the atmosphere that was going on in the world. By that time, our dress code had dropped dramatically. We were just about, you could wear just about anything you wanted to at that time, and you had to blend in. We could now wear beards, and in addition to our grooming standards that we had before, which was long hair, stuff like this, to blend in downtown with your folks. Each team had their own safe houses. Okay, that's how we operated independently. Each team had their own safe houses downtown, and this was very important because in the early days, like if the Russians decided they wanted to take over Europe, who was the first to fall would be Berlin. Now, the Supreme Allied Commander, when he designated these teams to go to Berlin, said, please, all I need is as much time as you could give me. Well, this was almost like a suicide mission. Okay, you had 6 teams. And the immediate, if the balloon went up, you went downtown and you did what you had to do. Each team, there was, like I said, there was several missions. There was 4 at the time. In the early days, you had easy access to and from East Berlin. But then when the wall went up in 1961, it became a different story. You had 4 targets in East Berlin, 2 major targets in West Berlin. Now, the teams that had the targets in East Berlin had a lot of trouble trying to reconnoiter these things and keep up with what was going on. So we rectified that situation by the military liaison missions, which was conducted by Berlin Brigade S2. And that was they were just nothing but spy missions. Okay, the Russians could come over to our side. They had designated routes they could go on and take a look, take pictures and stuff like this. We did the same in East Berlin. So once a month, a team would send 2 guys to Berlin Brigade, get a haircut, put on your green uniform, sterile, Berlin patch, and you got in a staff car with a lieutenant and a MP driver, and you and one other guy in the back seat, and we'd go over to East Berlin. And you could reconnoiter, as close as possible, your targets and stuff like this. You'd go downtown to Karl Marx Platz, and Karl Marx Platz was like a big mall, okay? And also you went to a guest house and had a good meal, and you could live for 5 marks. You could get a hell of a good meal with all the wine you wanted to drink and all the beer you wanted to drink. And you'd come back, report to S2, what you saw, what you seen. And that was one way that we got across the border to our targets in East Berlin. And of course, the Russians were doing, like I said, were doing the same thing to us. And before that, in 1961, before the wall went up, the Russians could come into our PX, our commissary, and all this stuff, and we could do the same thing over in East Berlin. But that all stopped when the wall went up in 1961. Now, that wall went up not to prevent people from coming in. It went up to keep people from coming out, because it was a mass exodus of refugees trying to get out of East Berlin, because the East German Stasi and the Russian KGB had pretty much control over everything that went on all the time. And it was not, they were not too happy with it. So the wall went up, and that's when the refugees started trying to cross the fences that they put up and stuff like this. We even had one group. He was a young man down in S1 at the time in Det-A. That was 1969. He saw a way to make some money, so he started smuggling himself and one other guy, people out of East Germany to West Germany. The Russians did not catch him, or the East Germans did not catch him. It was the military intelligence caught him outside of Checkpoint Charlie one night, and they had a trunk load of refugees in there. They got caught and gone. Of course, in Berlin and Det-A, if you got involved in something, you were gone overnight. You were not there the next morning for formation. And that happened if you were involved in any kind of drug incidents or stuff like this. It was very, very closely controlled environment. You had to toe the line completely. And Det-A's people were very, very highly qualified folks. Let me tell you, the best I've ever seen in special forces. You did not mess around. Some of our training was each year we'd go down to Bad Tölz, Germany, Berchtesgaden, and we had ski training 2 weeks. Again, civilian clothes, civilian skis, everything. All your lift tickets were paid for. Now, this was not pleasure skiing. It was extreme skiing. You skied off like mountains like the Jänner. Very hairy, straight downhill skiing. No pleasure skiing at all. And that was also, you had a cross-country mission that you did. You put on a uniform, and you and another team would race from the Jänner down to the Vorderbrand where we stayed at. It was a guest house that we it was sold out to Detachment A during the 4 weeks of ski training. Half the detachment would go down 2 weeks, and the other half would go down another 2 weeks. And then, of course, you had flintlock. You had O&I training down at Omaramagao. We stayed within the military guidelines all the time, all kinds of military training that were required. Of course, we did, but except the access missions that were put upon Detachment A, nobody in this room, or you're in that room, that audience, could believe what Detachment A did during that time frame from 1956 to 1984. It was unbelievable. And to this day, people still, the best words I ever heard were when we left a mission or something like this, who the hell are these guys? They were just like in awe. They didn't know. Now, Det-A was not recognized. It was totally classified, not recognized by anybody, not even SF. We didn't become 39th Special Forces until the late 60s, early 60s, mid 60s. Then they designated us 39th Special Forces. Like I said, we're independent from 10 Special Forces or any Special Forces command at all. We operated independently. It was total independence. Each team operated on their own. That's why there was no real military control over the teams. They knew their missions. They prepped for their missions. They studied it. They went downtown, established their own safe houses, lived downtown. All the bachelors, some of the bachelors, but some remained in Det-A at the bachelor quarters. Some would go downtown and rent places like on the Kudam and stuff like this. And here in the States, when I retired in 1981, Det-A was still operating in Berlin. You had Command Sergeant Major Jeff Raker and Stanley Olshemek. By this time, after we got the CT mission, Detachment A had to prove their proficiency with his CT, Counterterrorism mission. So they prepped for this. This was a big test, European-wise. We trained with the BGS-9, and it was on a train that was hijacked. And that was our test for the CT proficiency, to be certified as a CT outfit to operate in Europe. And we passed that test, and we trained with the BGS-9, and they didn't play around. We used live ammunition. They used live ammunition in training. And at one time, one of our guys got shot twice. He didn't die, but he got shot twice in training that we were doing in the mid 70s. We were prepping for upcoming counter-terrorist missions. And then what happened? The hostage situation developed in Iran. Now, nobody knew what to do. Jimmy Carter was a president at that time. We all know that. And things were very confused at the beginning. And Detachment A got notified. There might be a mission coming up for you to rescue these hostages. Well, okay. Stanley Olshemek and Jeff Raker says, let's get ready to rock and roll here. They did. Each team started preparing for Eagle Claw at the beginning of Eagle Claw. Delta Force was involved. Det-A was involved in Eagle Claw. And of course, you all know that was an abortion. That just didn't work out too well for the situation at hand. So immediately, Charlie Beckwith, Delta Force, Plan B into effect. Desert 2 was designated to conduct the second phase of this operation. Well, by then, everything was, all the hostages were not at the American embassy no more. They were scattered all over the place. And our intelligence was not too good at that time. Now, in addition to the embassy, people don't know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was a few blocks down the road. We had 3 prisoners in there. One was the ambassador himself, who was there on business that day. Now, these 3 officials were being held at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there was 2 targets involved in the second phase of this operation. And I'll go into the names of these things in a minute here. Okay, you had, at first you had the Eagle Claw. Then there was, I gotta take care of this. Trying to find Storm Cloud, was the next phase. And Storm Cloud involved both missions. Charlie Beck was at the second phase there, the operation base, which was outside of our Tehran. We had two guys on the ground in Tehran who were casing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They were there on the ground, physically posing as terrorists in civilian clothes and stuff like this. And we had another team with Charlie Beckwith again on the assault team that was going to come out of the second base. And they were to transport from that base to Tehran with Mercedes trucks. It was about a 60-mile ride. At that base, there was two C-141s standing by, one for evacuation of hostages. The other one was a helicopter, not a helicopter, excuse me, a hospital C-141, because it was anticipated there was going to be a lot of activity, a lot of killing going on, and there was going to be a lot of casualties. In addition, they had CH-53s stationed there. C-130 Spectres were stationed there also for the assault, pre-assault. And it was going to be one hell of an operation. It was a bloodbath. Charlie Beckwith said, look, my Delta Force is committed. I cannot cover both targets. I just don't have enough people. Well, that's when our commander, Stanley Olshavik, stepped up. He said, well, Det-A will take that mission. So Det-A took the mission. At first, we thought about 10, 12 people could handle the situation. Well, the two men on the ground reported back and said, no, this is heavily fortified, a lot of people. So we're going to have to expand the force, attack force. So Stanley Olshavik said, okay, fine. So they all got on a C-141, headed to Florida to prepare for the attack. Each team got stick training in helicopters, because the helicopters that were going to be used to load Det-A folks for the attack on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you could not put a co-pilot in there. It was too heavy. There was just not enough room. So they all got stick training so they could land that chopper if something happened to the pilot. Okay, it was like a Loach, I guess it was, the two-man, very small helicopter, very fast, quick, get in, get out. Well, luckily, Ronald Reagan was out there raising hell, telling the Iranians, look, you best get our people out of there because I'm going to come in and get them. And he scared the hell out of them, because shortly after that, they released the hostages. And the mission never took place, luckily, because Jeff Raker said later in his debriefing, he thought a lot of people would have been killed right there because it was very tense. So that mission never took place. Det-A went back to Det-A, being Det-A, and that was in 81 timeframe, somewhere around there. Well, this was all fine and good. Det-A was back in the city doing his things, but the people at command, there was a news story leaked to Newsweek magazine by someone at Delta Force. That's the unofficial version now. There's an official version of why Detachment A shut down. But the unofficial version was somebody mouthed off a Newsweek magazine and described Detachment A in detail. So the powers to be said, look, we already got a Delta Force. We don't need two. And they thought, well, this might have compromised Detachment A. Well, that was the official story. So they started disbanding Detachment A, standing down, and PSSE was designated to come in to replace Detachment A. And that was a very loose deal right there. The guys, anybody there from PSSE will tell you what happened on the transition phase. About 10 guys from Det-A went over to PSSE. It was moved out of Andrews Barracks. They moved to Roosevelt Barracks, and their cover story was they were MPs. It's basically the same mission, but it changed. I was never in PSSE. I don't know what the actual missions were. I don't think the UW mission existed anymore. It's mainly counterterrorism at that time frame, the disco bombing in Berlin. Several things were happening in Africa. So I can't speak for PSSE, what their mission was and stuff like this. I have talked to them. I've held several functions in Asheville after PSSE. There was one final mission that Detachment had in '84 before they disbanded. It was called Odessa. There were several gangs rolling around Berlin at that time, Russians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians. And there was all kind of black market, not black market, but different things going on, passport fraud, weapons, and stuff like this. And the German secret police, who we work with very closely, asked Detachment A, we need a Russian speaker and some people for surveillance. Well, by that time, Det-A was down to about from 90 men to about 20. And they were involved daily with surveillance with the German secret police to help break up this organization. They shut the doors December 1984. Kevin Monahan locked the doors, and Det-A didn't exist anymore. PSSE was now in, and it was very, like I said, it was not a very clandestine operations. For example, Det-A had 2 Volkswagen buses, which was our primary source of transportation wherever we went. We had both German registration and American registration, along with the Detachment. I had several forms of identified documents ourselves, dual passports. We had GS cards. We had German driver's licenses and stuff like this so that we can move around. And one thing I didn't mention was everybody that came to Det-A in the early days was going to be language qualified. I got my notification. I was in Bad Tölz, Germany. My tour was coming up to an end. So I called Billy Alexander up in special categories in Washington, D.C. I says, Billy, what's in store for me? He said, well, if you volunteer to go back to Vietnam upon completion, I will send you to German language school in Monterey. Once you complete that, you got a choice. You can go back to Bad Tölz or you can go to Det-A. Of course, I chose Det-A, and the rest is history. And that, along with the Germans, the Large Act folks we had, made Detachment A very unique. It was, I mean, your cover stories were good. Your target acquisition, area studies on your targets was in detail that you'd never seen before. You even knew the people that worked in these places. You know where they lived. When I told you about some of the weapons that we used, go ahead. We had stingers. They're called a stinger. It was a cigarette lighter, one shot, throw away, that we used. Like some of the bridges we knew were going to be armed, not armed, but had sentries and stuff like this. And we had to blow those certain bridges up. So you had to get very close. And a stinger was used. That was called a stinger. Scuba. We had the Wannsee for access to East Germany, and we had canals within the city that we used by scuba. And we had the best scuba gear going. We had rebreathers that even the SEAL teams didn't know we had. We had a 2-week course for people to come to Berlin that we taught for city training. SEAL Team 2 from Crete came. So several teams from 10th Group came. And we take them in downtown, train them exactly how we trained in the 60s and 70s with the dead drops, live drops, surveillance, and things like this. The SAS jumped with us a few times on our monthly jumps. We had a monthly jump every month that we flew down to Bad Tölz and kept our proficiency and stuff like this. Okay. So that is basically the story. Det-A folded. Came back to the States. Several guys went back to 10th Group, Fort Evans, and nobody knew for years and years and years about Detachment A. So I embarked on a mission myself to find out what was going on. We're dying on the vine. Nobody knew who we were. So I started a function, try to get recognized with well, at that time, General Shack now. He used to be a major commander when I was there. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to expose what Detachment A did because they're dying on the vine and they're not going to get credit for what they did. So I did, slowly but surely. We got things going. We planted the stone down at SOCOM dedicated to Detachment A. And I started a annual function in Asheville, several other places, Virginia, Myrtle Beach, and it was strictly for Detachment A. Then we incorporated PSSE also and called ourselves Special Forces Berlin. So the rest is history. And that's why I'm sitting here today to let folks know what went on, what happened. And these folks that are sitting there today can probably enlighten a few other folks sitting around there on their experiences, because my experiences is different from theirs, because like I said, every team was independent. So I think that's kind of a wrap there, Chris.
Yeah, Bob, thanks much. And what we're going to do is take a couple of questions for Det-A for Bob, and providing on time we have, Mitch can give us a quick overview on PSSE-B. Any questions? Right here, Vahan. And Bob, this is original Vahan Sapansi.
In the back of my mind, I remember two things relating to Det-A. One was that you might want to comment on. One had to do with Colonel McKenzie when he took over Det-A, and the other when the Berlin brigade commander, I believe, told everyone to get haircuts and get in uniforms. And I know you guys were really thrilled about that, and I don't know if you want to comment on that. Just one observation, though.
Cater, he was a DBC in Berlin. He came over to Berlin, Detachment A for briefing and all this kind of stuff. We had a weak Berlin commander. He was a DBC. He came over, he was not airborne qualified. He relieved Colonel McKenzie upstairs at formation that morning. I remember that. Colonel McKenzie got relieved. Now we had the entranceways to Detachment A were controlled by code devices. He was downstairs banging like hell on the door. So one of the guys ran down, opened the door. He ran upstairs, relieved Colonel McKenzie right on the spot, put us in uniform, haircuts, changed the sign outside the Berlin Brigade Airborne. Now at the Potsdam agreements, there was not supposed to be any elite units at all in Berlin. Of course, they all had them. The Brits had the SAS. The Russians, KGB were there, and we were there, okay? So there we are, exposed completely. Now, Jeff Raker came over, Sergeant Major, one of the best Sergeant Majors I've ever seen, ever served with. He got this squared away. He went to the new brigade commander, explained the situation along with the brigade sergeant major, and says, look, this man has compromised us. So Terry Swafford put on a briefing for the new brigade commander. He sat there first. I thought, oh God, here's another one. He looked like he was asleep in the front row. He stood up there and he said, I want you people back in uniform, back doing what you were doing, and I want it done right now. So that was the end of Colonel Cater's rule over Detachment A. Plus, he had us training his NCOs over there in brigade with EIB training, with the cavalry for EIB training, scout swimmer training, all kinds of exotic training. He wanted us to teach the brigade, Berlin Brigade 6th Infantry. So we were being used as cavalry for the 6th Infantry. Our mission was no longer being used at all. We were compromised during that period. And then Stanley Olszewicz came in, and he and Jeff Raker got us really back on track like Det-A never was before. But yes, you're right. That was quite an experience, let me tell you.
Next, I'm going to go to Henry Bertrand, one of our originals, Bob, and a member of Detachment A. Henry.
How are you doing, Bob?
Well, my man, Henry Bertrand, he was the first man. He lived across the hall from me in the B&Q in Berlin. He took me downtown my first week in Berlin and showed me a little bit of the city. Henry Bertrand and I go back to 1969 together. He was there before me, and I learned a lot from Henry Bertrand.
There you go. Think back, Bob, think back to 69, 70.
Yep.
Do you remember asking someone for a hammer?
Yep. I remember that. I was always looking for a hammer to put stuff up on the wall, and finally I kept banging on Henry's door. Hey, I need to borrow your hammer. Well, the next thing I know, here comes Henry with a hammer. He said, "This is yours. You keep it."
We lived in the BEQ at Andrews Concern, and Bob walked down the hallway and asked me if I had a hammer. And I asked him what he was going to do with it. He said, "Well, I'm remodeling my room." I said, "Okay. All right, nice seeing you again, man. You looking good?"
Good hearing from you, Henry.
Thanks, Henry. Any questions for Detachment A? In the back.
Hey, sir. Chief Warrant Officer 2 Charles. I'm actually still active here at 10th Group. I'm curious, what was the selection process to get you guys in it? Was it as simple as, oh, you speak German? Here's a flight to Berlin, or was there an actual more scrutiny than that?
It was, you had to be, first, top secret clearance. You had to speak German, like you just said. Yes, that was the important thing. And if you were European, that was another important qualification to go to Berlin. If you spoke any kind of Eastern European language, that was also considered to be selected in Berlin. And your record had to be impeccable. And mostly it was from 10th Group people. The 7th Group had their group, 8th Group had their group, 1st Group had their kind of people, that were always oriented towards Asia and stuff like this. And we were geared towards Europe all the time. And there was no real exception. You just had to be a good Special Forces trooper.
Thank you. I'm going to take the time. Wait, we got one more question?
If you don't mind. Bob, just real quick, thank you for all that you guys did. The pedigree that you guys created across Special Forces is also a little unknown. As a quick history, 2 former members of Det-A ended up in 7th Group, and along with my Group S2 and my MI company lead at the time, we created and stood up a similar capability that was focused on Central and South America. That was 84, 85 timeframe. We took a lot of the tradecraft that you guys had perfected for urban operations, and we were able to apply it to do what we needed to do. So thank you for that legacy. And later on, the ASOP program came to be, and later on, now we've got the 4th Battalion program standing up as well. So your legacy is well known, sir. So thank you for that.
Well said.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'd like to take a few moments here with Mitch to kind of give a quick overview of PSSE-B, and then we'll finish up with final questions. Mitch?
Jawohl. Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Ich bin der Abteilungschef. Ich bin verantwortlich für das Training und den Einsatz. What movie is that? In early 1985, the Det-A soldiers had taken leave PCS back to the United States and had been assigned to ODAs in 10th Group. Us young guys looked up to them, and I was fortunate on ODA 315 to have Chief Mike Mallory come to my team. You've seen him. He's one of the unibrow guys in the black and white photos with the trench coat on. He started talking about this unit, and I said, "Hey, Chief, how do you get involved?" And he said, "You'll get the word." So I re-enlisted for German DLI, and I was at the Presidio of San Francisco, and I'm going to tie in to our originals talk. How did I find out about it, and how was I recruited? I found out about it from one of my teammates who had been in Det-A, who was at Devon's with me, and he said, we'll put the word out to the network that you're interested, because PSSE Berlin was already active again in 1985. So while at German DLI, at the Presidio of San Francisco, Staff Sergeant Underback, you have a visitor. report to the CQ. And I went down there, and there was a country gentleman in civilian clothes. Mitch, where can we talk? It was Sergeant Major Robley. He never told me his name. We went to a private room, and he said, I think you know who I am, and I think you know where I'm from. Of course, I knew neither. Well, we heard you want to join our outfit. So you finish up here in German, and I can assure you, you will use your MOS behind the Iron Curtain. So I immediately had flashbacks to Colonel Hogan and Hogan's Heroes, and thought about Fraulein Helga. And upon graduation, I went into this system at Fort Meade where your administrative records are kept on the secret side, and transferred to Berlin, where I was assigned to headquarters in the communications and electronics section. I'll give you a few vignettes of how we were trained. So how does a 26-year-old Staff Sergeant 18 Echo, who does speak pretty good German, what's your first training if you're in the communications and electronics section? They have a retired case officer contractor come over from the National Capital Region, and for at least 2 straight weeks, you receive one-on-one training, one-on-one tradecraft training from a retired case officer. Now, this guy was right out of a John le Carré novel. He smoked a pipe. He had a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows. He looked like Donald Sutherland's character in Animal House, if you are old enough to know that movie. And he took me around the city, teaching me everything that I needed to know to operate as a singleton in the city of Berlin. The final exam was the Unit XO, Steve Philbrick, who was with the case officer and told, now Mitch is going to go and place a cache. Mitch is going to go leave a load signal. Mitch is going to service a cache. Mitch is going to service a dead drop. Tell me if you see him doing any of this stuff. So my evaluator was told what I was going to do, and then I had to go do it. I wasn't allowed to lose them. That was the main thing. And at the end, when Major Philbrick said, I didn't see Mitch do anything, I had passed. Not that I was going to be sent home, but it was just a nice way to be validated that our Central Intelligence Agency contractors can train young, dumb, 26-year-old commo men to do secret squirrel stuff in occupied Berlin. We were told in C&E, develop your own networks, develop your own cover within the limits of the unit itself, and be prepared to do your own thing if the balloon went up. So utter back. Again, I was a young man. Did I say that enough times? So there was a lot of Norwegian nannies working in Berlin. And I thought, and they lived in pretty crappy apartments. And I thought, well, ingratiating myself into this subculture would be a great way to just be hidden from safe house to safe house. So my safe houses, Bob, were the apartments of Norwegian au pairs that worked in Berlin. True story. I realized that I might have to go anywhere in the city, and our mission, we still had a UW mission, so I might have to eventually conscript, figuratively, West Berliners to be on our side and fight from within inside the city. So, and by the way, German food's pretty heavy, and I was craving salad. And the only place you could get a salad in a non-smoking environment in West Berlin that time was at the Berlin Triathlon Club. So I joined the Berlin Triathlon Club, where I could get a salad in a non-smoking environment, but I was also with super fit people that could swim, bicycle, and run their ass off if the balloon had gone up. And I thought, this is a great group. So that was my G-force. Unknown to them, they were my Gs. I could say, I need you to run 10K at 6-minute miles and go do this. I need you to have C4 in the frame of your bicycle and go do this. Or if you've seen the movie Munich, maybe you've seen the zip guns in their bicycle pumps. We didn't have those, Bob. I wish we did. We probably would have made them. So I had a highly fit, qualified G-force that ran around in Lycra. Get it? Spandex, Lycra. Anyway. The radios that we used, Bob, were the same ones. The radios that you put in storage, we came out. So the OSS, SSTR1 radio, we practiced with those in the city. And not only did we know from Bob's AARs not to plug in the power supply to the building, but don't set your radio on the radiator. Because while you're tapping code in the radiator, guess what it's doing to the rest of the building? Just like in the movies. We did go to Garmisch for downhill skiing. Still, Bob, in the late 80s, when I got there in 87, we still skied in Garmisch. And one of the most difficult things for your ego, for being in PSSEB, is you had to dress like a German. You had to wear the ugliest ski clothes, neon. We refused, though, to tuck our pants in our cowboy boots and then tuck our sweatshirts in our pants, because that's how they looked. I was wearing some local clothes that I bought with the fund one day while riding on a train, and I could hear the older couple behind me say, "Der sieht als ein Kind, dessen zu klein ist." He looks like a kid who's wearing clothes that are too small. And I thought, damn, I'm wearing the latest fashions, but for the old people, I look like a kid that was poorly dressed. I was the worst radio operator in the unit, so I compensated by trying to be one of the most useful in other ways, in UW and in the CT missions. And Colonel Donlin and I were talking about culture the other night, and not only being culturally competent in SF is it important because you want to blend in with the society and you want to develop rapport and help them accomplish, help them accomplish your mission. Well, understanding German culture allowed us to inflict their culture back on them for our advantage. Case in point, while the teams were conducting a counterterrorism exercise during the day at Tempelhof Airport, Bob, snipers on the roof, assault teams moving around dressed just as you have described in the maintenance uniforms around the Pan Am aircraft, circulating around while the airport is active that day. The snipers are on the roof taking 35mm photographs, black and white film. Utterback was also the unit photographer and film developer, and we had our photo lab in a suitcase on wheels. So I needed to develop the film live at the airport while the exercise was going on. So I went into a men's bathroom. I had a pad of paper and a pen, and I wrote in German, "Außer Betrieb," out of service. And I taped it on the outside of the men's bathroom and turned the bathroom into a dark room. And not a single German opened the door or knocked on the door because the sign says closed. So they follow the rules, or at least they used to, and a sign that says out of service meant that I knew that culturally they weren't going to try that door. Now, SF guys do just the opposite. Well, if it's out of service, that means I have it to myself. And quite literally, that's what I had. So I will humbly offer the microphone back to Chris for some questions, but I just want, Bob, you to know that the unit that you and Henry created, young men heard about it, strove to be members of it, and certainly tried to leave it in the short time that we were there better than we found it. And I left in 1988 to attend ROTC and move on in other parts of my career. So, Colonel Saponsi, I left the unit in order to pursue my education just like you did. So Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Dankeschön, Mitch. Haben einen Mann an Fragen.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up with Alan McRae. He's in PSSE. He described to Detachment A at one of our functions, the transition from Detachment A to PSSE. It was a very good story, very enlightening. And the rest, like I said, is history. I retired in '81. I never even heard of PSSE until the late '90s when I started my functions to resurrect Detachment A's history in the Special Forces Regiment. And I found out a lot about it. And it was all Alan McRae. He was a sergeant major in PSSE. And he gave us a very good briefing at the Myrtle Beach function I had. And that's when I learned about PSSE. Now, you mentioned the CIA. They taught us a lot of tradecraft in Det-A. You remember the old microdots and the secret writing and the lock picking? We had all that from the CIA. Now, they were supposed to provide us with, in case the balloon went up, a group of folks who would fight alongside of us to conduct guerrilla warfare. I never saw that, and I don't know if it was ever developed or not. We had our own individual E&E missions that we created ourselves because it was a suicide mission. And once we blew up all our targets and conducted whatever havoc else that we could, we were on our own. And we knew that. And that's what made Detachment A members very unique. It was pretty obvious. It was a suicide mission. Thank you for that input on PSSE. And you can thank Alan McRae for enlightening Detachment A members on PSSE. And like I said, we invited them to several of our functions. The last one was 2019 before COVID. And it was almost, we sold out the hotel and the Days Inn on Tunnel Road in Asheville. It was sold out. So that was kind of like the end, because everybody's scattered now all over the place. They're dying off. They don't want to travel no more. So it's kind of a sad ending, but we had a good time and we made it last as long as we could make it last.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. I'll just ask any final questions and we'll wrap it. Well, thank you. This has been a very enlightening session to understand Det-A. I'd like to remind folks that Bob manages the Det-A website, and again, in my opinion, one of the best for capturing a unit's history over the time as Det-A has. So Bob, thank you for your good work on that, and we wish you well. Folks, thank you.